This is Algebra 2 at Trig, 1C.5. We're talking about the quadratic formula and what the discriminant means. There's two different ways to look at the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is your line of symmetry. That's negative b over 2a, and then you have a value that you add to get to this x-intercept, and you have that same distance that you subtract to get to your x-intercept. So that's what this quadratic formula is doing. And we can combine our denominators into one more simpler looking like equation. So here's our quadratic formula. Negative b, the opposite of what b is, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Quadratic formula. It helps us solve for the x-intercepts, or you could say it solves for the solutions or the roots of any quadratic equation written in standard form. It's got to start in standard form. So here we have one started in standard form. Remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. And we're looking to see where this equation crosses the x-axis. We're looking for the solutions. We're looking for the x-intercepts. We're looking for the roots. Now, if we look at this one, we could subtract the 6 across. We wouldn't want to complete the square because this has an odd number. 7's an odd number, so you don't want to take 7 divided by 2 and square it, so we probably would not use completing the square here. Here, maybe we would use factoring, but I don't think anything multiplies to be negative 6 and adds to be 7, so I guess that's out also. Can't factor this. So there is another method. Quadratic formula helps us solve where factoring is not working and where completing the square doesn't work or isn't nice. I guess that's a much better way to put it. So we have our A term, which is 1, our B term, which is 7, and our C term, which is negative 6. A, B, and C. So our quadratic formula, negative b, so negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, this is what you need to produce on your homework, quizzes, and tests. You need to show the numbers you plugged into the formula. You got to start with that. Then, it may take us 1 or 2 steps to get to the next thing that you must show. X equals negative 7 plus or minus. I can't simplify that at all, so it stays negative 7. 7 squared is 49. Now, this is where lots of mistakes happen for people who do it by hand. This is minus 4 times. 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. So this is minus negative 24. Minus negative 24 is actually positive 24. So a lot of people might make a mistake and call that a negative 24. So you got to be careful. Divided by 2. Then we add this value together and we get the square root of 73. Negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 73 over 2. That is your exact answer. That's the other value you need to show on your homework tests and quizzes. You plug in your numbers, and then you simplify it down. If you need to use a calculator to do the discriminant, that's fine. That's the value inside your radical. You need to come up with this number. Notice that it is a positive number. What does positive do for us? Let's find out. Now here, for us to work with this radical, because it is square root of 73, we know it's more than 8 times 8, because that would be the square root of 64. It's more than 8 because that would be the square root of 64. And it's less than 9 because that would be the square root of 81. So it's somewhere between 8 and 9. Negative 7 plus the square root of 73. Notice what I'm going to do. I'm just going to hit enter. That's my whole numerator. Calculate it out. Divided by 2. That gives me 0.77. We're going 2 decimals. So x equals 0.77. Or you have negative 7 minus the square root of 73. Hit enter so you have the calculation of the top of your fraction divided by 2. And that gives you negative 7.77. So those are your 2 answers. You'll get 2 answers every time this value inside the square root is positive. Think about why. You're taking negative 7 and you're adding and subtracting a positive value. Square root of 73 is a positive number. So you're adding and subtracting what is approximately 8.5 to the negative 7. So you get 2 answers when you do that. If you look down at the bottom of the notes, if the value inside the radical, we're going to call that the discriminant. The value inside the radical, b squared minus 4ac, when that is greater than 0, when that is a positive, we're going to have a parabola that is crossing the x-axis twice. We get 2 real solutions, 2 x-intercepts, when our discriminant is a positive number. Sometimes that's all we need to know. You don't need to do the whole calculation. You just need to know how many solutions are you expecting. I'm expecting 2 because my discriminant is positive. Let's come on over here and try this one. So for our next example, you might notice that they're all even, and you can divide this by 2. Factor out the 2, divide by the 2, get rid of the 2. That's just fine. But most of you might just say, hey, A is 2, B is negative 8, C is 8. And you just do it with the numbers. And that's fine with the quadratic formula. You don't have to simplify it. So using the quadratic formula, negative 8. So it's negative B. So this is negative 8. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. You have to put parentheses around it. That will be a problem for people. They won't put a parenthesis. You'll type it into your calculator incorrectly, and you'll use the number negative 64. People will make that mistake. Minus 4ac. So I plug my values into my formula that we have right here, and we divide that by 2a. 2 times 2. Be sure you use the correct number. 2 times 2 is your a. So this is going to come out to be positive 8. So negative 8 squared is 64, minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 8 is 64. Hey, look at that one. This is 8 plus or minus the square root of 0. divided by 4. So really it's 8 divided by 4, which is 2. Notice the value that's inside the discriminant, or that is the discriminant. Look at the value that's inside the radical. It's 0. What happened when we had 0? You only got one answer. Why do you get one answer when the value inside the radical is 0? 8 plus or minus nothing divided by 4 is just a single number. You only have one solution. So when you look down here in these notes, when the discriminant b squared minus 4ac equals 0, you would expect your quadratic to be touching the x-axis at exactly 1 point. So that means the vertex is on the x-axis. You have one real solution, one x-intercept. That's when you have a 0 in the square root. Let's try this one. Think about what you might need to do. You first got to decide how to start these problems. We're going to add our x squared to both sides and subtract our 2x. Now, some of you might say, can I just move the 5 over? And the answer is yes, you can just move the 5 over. But as I've said since the beginning, I like to have my a value positive. I like a positive x squared. So I don't want to keep this negative x squared. Just helps with numbers and keeping track of my signs. So negative b, so negative 2, the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so you have to have that in parentheses, minus 4ac. All over 2a. So when we do that, the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. Minus 4 times 1, that's 4, times 5, which is 20. All divided by 2. So that's 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 16, all divided by 2. Now, some people make a mistake here. They see the 2's are dividing each other, and they like to cross those 2's out. You can't cross those 2's out because you're adding it to something else. It's not just a 2. You can't just divide part of a numerator. You got to divide the whole numerator. You can do that with multiplication. You cannot do that with addition and subtraction. So this becomes 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 is 4. The negative makes I divided by 2. And you know that we like to break that up into two different values. And those you can reduce. You need to be sure you're reducing it to both sides. We don't cross the 2's out, but the 2 divided by 2 makes a 1. But you also got to be able to reduce it with the right side of the plus sign. So what did we get? We have an imaginary answer, an imaginary number. So we got imaginary number because what was inside the square root was negative. So if your discriminant is negative, you get two imaginary solutions. That means the graph does not touch the x-axis. I think about it like a shadow is touching your x-axis. It's not a real spot, but it's like an imaginary spot. You get no x-intercepts. So let's use these numbers. So here we're going to use the discriminant. We're going to find the discriminant, and that's going to help us give the number and the type of solutions. Remember, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. That is the discriminant. That's the value inside the radical. It does not include the radical. It's the value inside the radical. So here we notice that a is 1, b is 6, c is 5. So b squared minus 4ac. That's 36 minus 20 gives us 16. 16 is the discriminant, not the square root of 16. 16 is the discriminant. I notice it's positive, so I have two real solutions. That's what we would expect for that one. I think that happens to be the same problem we did on the other page. All right, this guy. How many solutions do you expect from this? Well, my A value is 1, my B value is 6, my C value is 9. B squared minus 4AC, that's 36 minus 36, that gives me 0, which gives me 1 real solution, because I'm adding only 0 to a value. I'm adding nothing, so I'm adding 0, so I get only one answer, what we discussed on the other side. Then my last one, you might be able to guess. What do we expect it to be? So my b squared minus 4ac, so that looks like 36 minus 52. So that looks like negative 16. That's a negative answer. So if it's negative, I get two imaginary solutions. So that's what the discriminant can do for us. The last part I want to point out to you is here's the formula that we were dropping when we dropped an object, and here's a new formula that we're using when we are launching or throwing. The V of O is your initial velocity. So it has speed when it's being tossed out. So if you read the storyline, you see that the ball is leaving the height. So the original height is 4. The initial velocity is 40 feet per second. And you're wondering when it's going to hit 3 feet. So you've got to read through your story problem and find the parts of your formula, or for your formula. So we use that formula to plug our numbers into. H of O is the beginning height. V of O is the speed. And from there, we can work on it and move the 3 across, and we'd probably want to use the quadratic formula. So let's try that. Let's move the 3 over. How do I know I need to move the 3 over? I move the 3 over because it has a b value, so I need to move all terms to the same side. The only time we didn't do that is when we completed the square. And this would be an evil thing to complete the square of. So we're not going to complete the square. So the other option is to move everything over to the same side since it has a b value. I know my a value is negative 16, my b value is 40, and my c value is 1. So I'm solving for t, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All over 2a. So that's negative 40 plus or minus 1600. Negative and a negative make a positive. That should be 54. No, 64. Divided by negative 32. So that's negative 40 plus or minus 1664 over negative 32. So I'm going to take my calculator, negative 40 plus the square root of 1664 divided by negative 32 gives me a negative answer. I don't want negative time. So let's try the other way. Negative 40 minus the square root of 1664 divided by negative 32. Ah, that makes sense. Negative 32 goes into a negative 80. 2.52 seconds. There's my best answer. Good job.